Alright, and welcome to Linear Inverses Level 1. Now, in our very first example, we want to find f inverse of x. And I'm going to give you a function here in a second, but the first question should be, what is f inverse of x? Well, I want you to imagine we have a traditional function. And let's say over here, you know what, here's my x values, and here are my f of x values. So another way to say this is these are my inputs, and over here these are my outputs. Okay, and you learned about this in Algebra 1. Now, let's say that over here we have 1, 2, and 3, and over here we have, I don't know, 2, 4, and 6. So clearly this function is equal to 2x. It's doubling the input. Okay, and you can say that 1 maps to 2, 2 maps to 4, 3 maps to 6, and clearly this is an example of an one-to-one function. However, what in the world would be f inverse of x? So notice that whenever you see this little power of -1, we call this the inverse. Okay, this stands for the inverse. Well, in this case, what we would actually write here is we take our inputs and our outputs and we actually swap them. We say, you know what, over here, here's f of x, and here's x. And so now our inputs are technically 2, 4, and 6, and over on the right we have 1, 2, and 3. Now notice the function is still one-to-one, but all you did was flip your inputs for your outputs. Okay, now how does this relate to sort of, I don't know, an equation? How can you find the f of x of an equation? And that's what we're going to really dive into here. Okay, so let's say this. Let's say we have f of x is equal to 2x plus 3. What in the world are we going to do? Well, step one, very easy. We're always going to change our f of x into y. So we can go ahead and write this as y equals 2x plus 3. Now, what is our second step? We are going to switch the position of x and y. We're going to switch the position of x and y. So what in the world does this look like? Well, it now looks like x equals 2 y plus 3. And now we go on to our third step. And here we solve for y. Okay, so if I want to solve for y, I want to get y by itself. Let's see, what am I going to do? I start by subtracting 3. I subtract 3. And I now have x minus 3 is equal to 2y. And now I'll just divide everything by 2. So there's kind of two ways I can do this. Way number one, I can divide the whole thing, and I kind of get my very first answer here, which is y is equal to x minus 3 all divided by 2. Or I could write y is equal to 1 over 2x minus 3 over 2. I can split that 2 up to each one of them. And so this is almost our answer. Alright, I want you to pause the video, finish taking notes, but more or less there's one final step. And here's our final step. Step number 4. And in fact, why don't I write this in white? Step number 4. Change y to f inverse of x. And so I'd say, you know what, I have my f inverse of x is equal to 1/2 x minus 3 over 2. And so you can notice that here we have our original function, and here we have our inverse function. And basically, our first function takes our inputs and translates them into outputs, or maps them into outputs, whereas our second function can take our outputs and map them back to the inputs. You can think of it as working backwards. Alright, let's try a second example. Alright, here we have example number 2, and we want to find f inverse of x. So notice in problem number one, or I'm sorry, step number one, we always change our f of x into y. And so now we can say, well, you know what, y is equal to 8x minus 24. Now from there, in our step number two, we know that we're going to switch our x and our y. Because remember, the ultimate idea here is you're finding out what's the function that flips the inputs and the outputs. And so we have x is equal to 8y minus 24. Now from here, we want to solve for y. So the first thing I get rid of is my subtraction. I add 24 to both sides, plus 24, plus 24. And now we can go ahead and say, you know what? We have x plus 24 is equal to 8y. Our zero pair is gone. And our final step is that we're going to divide both sides by 8. Now notice, you could write two things. You could write y is equal to x plus 24 over 8, or y is equal to, remember there's always a 1 in front of the x, so when I split it up I have 1 over 8x plus, and what's 24 divided by 8? Well, of course that would be 3. Now from here, pause the video, finish taking your notes, but this actually brings us to our fourth and final step. I'm not going to write it because I want you to see it right below the original function. But our fourth and final step, we're going to rewrite y as f inverse of x is equal to, and here in this case I'm actually going to write it as such, x plus 24 all over 8. Alright, so there's our function and there's our inverse function. And I want you to note something. If you were to follow your order of operations, you would first multiply 8 times x, and then you would subtract 24. What would be the exact opposite of it? Well, working entirely backwards, the opposite of subtracting 24 is adding 24, and the opposite of multiplying by 8 is to divide by 8. So you can think of this inverse function as not only the opposite operations, but also the opposite operations in the opposite order. Alright, well guys, I'm going to do one final example. Okay, here we have example 3, find f inverse of x. Well, notice my very first step is that I'm going to change f of x into y. And so we have y is equal to 3x minus 9. Now remember, from here, I flip my x and my y, and as I fill in the rest of this, I have x is equal to 3y minus 9. From there, notice we want to solve for y by first getting rid of our subtraction. And so we have x plus 9 is equal to 3y, which we can then go ahead and divide everything by 3. And notice this gives us two distinct options. It gives us y is equal to x plus 9 all over 3, or we could split it up, y is equal to 1 over 3x plus 9 divided by 3 is 3. Now from those two options, you can choose either one that you want to go ahead and compare your inverse function to your original f of x, but you would go ahead and get something like this. You would get f inverse of x is equal to, and I'll switch back to the second version this time, 1 over 3x plus 3. Alright, I hope this helps, and I'll see you guys in our next video.